Hello all, and welcome back to Tangents on Cracked Spines. Sorry, I'm still a little without a voice. If you're new here, I'm glad you're here, but maybe go back about 10 episodes to start this intro from the beginning. Or start the story from the beginning. As a quick intro, I'm Frankie, and we'll be reading with unedited personal commentary on the classics, or in reality, any story in the public domain. By the way, it was brought to my attention that Lord of the Rings goes into the public domain next year. Listener discretion is advised as some of the content holds adult themes and language. And I'm also known to drop the odd explicative, though I'm trying to stop. The Invisible Man is not helping, which is what we are currently reading. In the last episode, we found out we got more proof that the Invisible Man, Griffin, is an absolute terrible person. He went to Drury Lane, which is an artisanal street in the slums of London, I believe. And he went and robbed a man, and then got upset that the man was taking self-defense measures and knocked him out down the steps and then tied him up in a sheet for good measure. Then went about stealing his food and clothes and then didn't bother to even untie the bag. So we're not even sure if the man's still alive. And he has no idea what he did wrong. The person he's telling the story to, Dr. Kemp, is like, "You did what?" And he's like, "What's that tone of voice? He was gonna hurt me." You were in his house. Of course he was going to hurt you if he could find you. But I digress. We resume with Chapter 24, The Plan That Failed. Sounds like all of his ideas thus far, except turning invisible in general. I'm gonna try not to cough at y'all. Alright. "But now," said Kemp, with a side glance out the window, "what are we to do?" He moved nearer his guest as he spoke in such a manner as to prevent the possibility of a sudden glimpse of the three men who were advancing up the hill road, with an intolerable slowness, as it seemed to Kemp. What were you planning to do when you were headed for Port Burdock? Had you any plan? "I was going to clear out of the country, but I have altered that plan rather since seeing you." Kemp must have been thrilled at that statement. "I thought it would be wise, now the weather is hot and invisibility possible, to make for the south, especially as my secret was known and everyone would be on the lookout for a masked and muffled man. You have a line of streamers from here to France." I can read, I promise. I'm sorry, y'all. "You have a line of steamers from here to France. My idea was to get aboard one and run the risks of the passage. Thence I could go by train to Spain, or else get to Algiers. It would not be difficult. There a man might always be invisible, and yet live, and do things. I was using that tramp as a money box and luggage carrier until I decided how to get my books and things sent over to meet me." That's clear. "And then the filthy brute must needs try and rob me. He has hidden my books, Kemp. Hidden my books, if I can lay my hands on him." Best plans to get the books out of him first. "But where is he? Do you know? Since seeing you, I thought it would be wise, now the weather is hot and invisibility possible, to make for the south." Why is that repeating? Did I move? No, it's... It does repeat. Master Muffled Man, line of steamers. Aha! Sorry, there's a paragraph that repeats. That's what happens when you download the free version. I could go to the library, but it's really far away. Bum, 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 bum. He's in the town police station, locked up by his own request in the strongest cell in the place. Curr! Said the Invisible Man. But that hangs up your plans a little. We must get those books. Those books are vital. Certainly, said Kemp, a little nervously, wondering if he heard footsteps outside. Certainly, we must get those books, but that won't be difficult if he doesn't know they're for you. No, said the Invisible Man, and thought. Kemp tried to think of something to keep the talk going, but the Invisible Man resumed of his own accord. Blundering into your house, Kemp, he said, changes all my plans, for you are a man that can understand. In spite of all that has happened, in spite of this publicity, of the loss of my books, of what I have suffered, there still remain great possibilities, huge possibilities. You have told no one that I am here, he asked abruptly. Kemp hesitated. That was implied, said Kemp. No one, insisted Griffin. Not a soul. Ah, now! The Invisible Man stood up and, sticking his arms akimbo, began to pace the study. I made a mistake, Kemp, a huge mistake, in carrying this thing through alone. I have wasted strength, time, opportunities. Alone. It is wonderful how little a man can do alone. To rob a little, to hurt a little, and there is the end. That shouldn't be your go-to. What I want, Kemp, is a goalkeeper, a helper, and a hiding place. An arrangement whereby I can sleep and eat and rest in peace and unsuspected. I must have a confederate. With a confederate, with food and rest, 1,000 things are possible. I'm pretty sure Kemp doesn't want to help you. He has a conscience. And you are a terrible person. Hitherto, I have gone on vague lines. We have to consider all that invisibility means, all that it does not mean. It means little advantage for eavesdropping and so forth. One makes sounds. It's of little help. A little help, perhaps, in housebreaking and so forth. Once you've caught me, you could easily imprison me. But on the other hand, I am hard to catch. This invisibility, in fact, is only good in 2 cases. It's useful in getting away, and it's useful in approaching. It's particularly useful, therefore, in killing. What, do you plan to become an assassin? You've got the heartlessness for it, but... My man, what the hell? I can walk round a man, whatever weapon he has, choose my point, and strike as I like, dodge as I like, escape as I like. He's like... He multi-classed in, like, rogue and barbarian, but he also has an education. Because he doesn't think things through, but he's all for the, like, bonuses for the sneak attack. Sorry, I play D&D. Well, I do role-playing games, seeing as they're trying to change their open license. Kemp's hand went to his mustache. Oh, Kemp has a mustache. I don't think we've been told what Kemp looks like. We only know what the Invisible Man looks like because it was important that he was an albino for his invisibility thing to work. And he's like 6.5 feet tall. Was that a movement downstairs? And it is killing we must do, Kemp. It is killing we must do, repeated Kemp. I'm listening to your plan, Griffin, but I'm not agreeing. Mind. Why killing? Not wanton killing, but a judicious slaying. The point is, they know there's an invisible man, as well as we know there's an invisible man. And that invisible man, Kemp, must now establish a reign of terror. Yes, no doubt it's startling. But I mean it, a reign of terror. He must take some town like your Burdock and terrify and dominate it. Like you didn't already do that in Nipping? He must issue his orders. He can do that in 1,000 ways. Scraps of paper thrust under doors would suffice, and all who disobey his orders he must kill, and kill all who would defend them. He's a raving lunatic. Humph, said Kemp, no longer listening to Griffin, but to the sounds of his front door opening and closing. Did Kemp call the police? Did I miss this? Do I not remember this? I have been sick a lot. It seems to me, Griffin, he said to cover his wandering attention, that your Confederate would be in a difficult position. No one would know he was a Confederate, said the Invisible Man eagerly, and then suddenly, Shh! What's that sound downstairs? Nothing, said Kemp, and suddenly began to speak loud and fast. I don't agree to this, Griffin. Understand me, I don't agree to this. Why dream of playing a game against the race? How can you hope to gain happiness? Don't be a lone wolf. Publish your results. Take the world. Take the nation, at least, into your confidence. Think what you might do with 1,000,000 helpers. The Invisible Man interrupted Kemp, arms extended. There are footsteps coming upstairs, he said in a low voice. Nonsense, said Kemp. Let me see, said the Invisible Man, and advanced, arm extended, to the door. And then things happened very swiftly. Kemp hesitated for a second and then moved to intercept him. The Invisible Man started and stood still. Traitor! Cried the voice, and suddenly the dressing gown opened, and sitting down, the unseen began to disrobe. Kemp made 3 swift steps to the door, and forthwith the Invisible Man, his legs had vanished, sprung to his feet with a shout. Kemp flung the door open. As it opened, there came a sound of hurrying feet downstairs and voices. With a quick movement, Kemp thrust the Invisible Man back, sprang aside, and slammed the door. The key was outside and ready. In another moment, Griffin would have been alone in the Belvedere study, a prisoner. Save for one little thing. The key had been slipped in hastily that morning. As Kemp slammed the door, it fell noisily upon the carpet. I've never heard something fall noisily upon the carpet that wasn't heavy. How heavy is this key? Kemp's face became white. He tried to grip the door handle with both hands. For a moment he stood, lugging. Then the door gave 6 inches, but he got it closed again. The second time it was jerked a foot wide, and the dressing gown came wedging itself into the opening. His throat was gripped by invisible fingers, and he left his hold on the handle to defend himself. He was forced back, tripped, and pitched heavily into the corner of the landing. The empty dressing gown was flung on top of him. Halfway up the staircase was Colonel Ide. Ady-Wye, the recipient of Kemp's letter, the chief of the Burdock police. He was staring aghast at the sudden appearance of Kemp, followed by the extraordinary sight of clothing tossing empty in the air. He saw Kemp felled and struggling to his feet. He saw him rush forward and go down again, felled like an ox. Then suddenly he was struck violently. By nothing! A vast weight, it seemed, leapt upon him, and he was hurled headlong down the staircase, with a grip on his throat and a knee in his groin. An invisible foot trod on his back. A ghostly patter passed downstairs. He heard the 2 police officers in the hall shout and run, and the front door of the house slammed violently. He rolled over and sat up, staring. He saw, staggering down the staircase, Kemp, dusty and disheveled, one side of his face white from a blow, his lip bleeding, and a pink dressing gown. He has a pink dressing gown? Well, I mean, at that point in time, pink was considered too strong a color for women, so that makes sense. And some underclothing held in his arms. "My God!" cried Kemp. "The game's up! He's gone!" Chapter 25. The Hunting of the Invisible Man. For a space, Kemp was too inarticulate to make Adye understand the swift things that had just happened. They stood on the landing, Kemp speaking swiftly, the grotesque swathings of griffin still on his arm. But presently Adye began to grasp something of the situation. "He is mad," said Kemp. "Inhuman. He is pure selfishness. He thinks of nothing but his own advantage, his own safety. I have listened to such a story this morning of brutal self-seeking. He has wounded men. He will kill them unless we prevent him. He will create a panic. Nothing can stop him. He is going out now, furious." "He must be caught," said Adye. "That is certain." "But how?" cried Kemp, and suddenly became full of ideas. "You must begin at once. You must set every available man to work. You must prevent his leaving this district. Once he gets away, he may go through the countryside as he wills, killing and maiming. He dreams of a reign of terror. A reign of terror, I tell you. You must set a watch on trains and roads and shipping. The garrison must help. You must wire for help. The only thing that may keep him here is the thought of recovering some books of notes he counts of value. I will tell you that. There is a man in your police station, Marvel." "I know," said Adye. "I know those books, yes. And you must prevent him from eating or sleeping. Day and night, the country must be astir for him. Food must be locked up and secured. All food, so that he will have to break his way into it. The houses everywhere must be barred against him. Heaven send us cold nights and rain. The whole countryside must begin hunting, and keep hunting, I tell you, Adye. He is a danger, a disaster. Unless he is pinned and secured, it is frightful to think of the things that may happen." "What else can we do?" said Adye. "I must go down at once and begin organizing. But why not come? Yes? You come too. Come, and we must hold a sort of council of war. Get Hops to help, and the railway managers. By Jove, it's urgent. Come along, tell me as we go. What else is there we can do? Put that stuff down." In another moment, Adye was leading the way downstairs. They found the front door open and the policeman standing outside, staring at empty air. "He got away, sir," said one. "We must go to the central station at once," said Adye. "One of you go on down and get a cab to come up and meet us. Quickly! And now, Kemp, what else?" Dogs," said Kemp. "Get dogs. They don't see him, but they wind him. Get dogs." "Good," said Adye. "It's not generally known, but the prison officials over at Halstead know a man with the bloodhounds. Dogs. What else?" "Bear in mind," said Kemp, "his food shows. After eating, his food shows until it's assimilated, so that he has to hide after eating." This makes me think of Hotel Transylvania. I just watched it recently, sorry. Where, like, can't remember the main character's name. Johnny once puts his hand in the invisible man's mouth to see if it shows. And technically, according to this logic, it would. Which is weird. You can see through him. So I guess it makes sense that if you put something in him, you would still see it. You must keep on beating every thicket, every quiet corner, and put all weapons, all implements that might be weapons, away. He can't carry such things for long, and what he can snatch up and strike men with must be hidden away. Good again, said Adye. We shall have him yet. And on the roads, said Kemp, and hesitated. Yes, said Adye. Powdered glass, said Kemp. It's cruel, I know, but think of what he may do. Adye drew the air in sharply between his teeth. It's unsportsmanlike, I don't know, but I'll have powdered glass got ready if he goes too far. The man's become inhuman, I tell you, said Kemp. I am sure he will establish a reign of terror, so soon as he got over the emotions of this escape. As I am sure I am talking to you, our only chance is to be ahead. He has cut himself off from his kind. His blood be upon his own head. Ooh. One, I like Kemp, but also, his blood be upon his own head. That's actually a pretty good sentence. No, where am I at? Ooh, I'm only at 20 minutes. How long is the next chapter? Yeah, it's not that long. Progress! Chapter 26. The Wicksteed Murder. Of course he's gone and murdered someone. The Invisible Man seems to have rushed out of Kemp's house in a state of blind fury. As if that's anything new. A little child playing near Kemp's gateway was violently caught up and thrown aside so that its ankle was broken, and thereafter for some hours the Invisible Man passed out of human perceptions. You hurt a kid! There was no reason to just grab a child and break his ankle, especially in the 1800s. Like that poor kid. It might set right, it might not. There weren't a whole lot of options for him. Oh, this guy is... He's worse than... I honestly believe that he is worse than Frankenstein's monster. After he set his sights on vengeance. Now, I do believe that monster is misunderstood and that the real villain was Frankenstein himself. But, he did go around killing people. But he at least had, some idea as to why. He didn't just kill people willy-nilly. This guy is worse. So much worse. Because he's just I hate the world. I'm going to kill you all. Psychopath. Again, I don't know psychology. I took a class in college, and that was more years ago than I care to mention. No one knows where he went nor what he did, but one can imagine him hurrying through the hot June afternoon, up the hill and onto the open downland behind Port Burdock. Right, it is... Okay, so it's now June. 'Cause he turned invisible in January. So he's been invisible for 6 months? 6 months? And he went to Ipping when it was still cold out. Was there for several months. Ruined Pentecost. And then came up to the shore. Bum, bum, bum. Raging and despairing at his intolerable fate, and sheltering at last, heated and weary, amid the thickets of Hintendine, to piece together again his shattered schemes against his species. That seems the most probable refuge for him. For there it was he reasserted himself in a grimly tragical manner about 2 in the afternoon. One wonders what his state of mind may have been during that time, and what plans he devised. No doubt he was almost ecstatically exasperated by Kemp's treachery, and though we may be able to understand the motives that led to the deceit, we may still imagine and even sympathize a little with the fury the attempted surprise must have occasioned. Yeah, I suppose, he feels he feels betrayed. But he needs to be stopped. I'm not playing devil's advocate with this one. Perhaps something of the stunned astonishment of his Oxford Street experiences may have returned to him, for he had evidently counted on Kemp's cooperation in his brutal dream of terrorized world. At any rate, he vanished from human ken about midday, having no living witnesses can tell what he did until about 2:30. It was a fortunate thing, perhaps, for humanity, but for him, it was a fatal inaction. During that time, a growing multitude of men scattered over the countryside were busy. In the morning, he had still been simply a legend, a terror. In the afternoon, by virtue chiefly of Kemp's dryly worded proclamation, he was presented as a tangible antagonist to be wounded, captured, or overcome, and the countryside began organizing itself with inconceivable rapidity. By 2 o'clock, even he might still have removed himself out of the district by getting aboard a train, but after 2 that became impossible. Every passenger train along the lines on a great parallelogram between Southampton, Manchester, Brighton, and Horsham traveled with locked doors, and the goods traffic was almost entirely suspended. And in a great circle of 20 miles round Port Burdock, men armed with guns and bludgeons were presently setting out in groups of 3 or 4, with dogs, to beat the roads and fields. Mounted policemen rode along the country lanes, stopping at every cottage and warning the people to lock up their houses and keep indoors unless they were armed, and all the elementary schools had broken up by 3 o'clock, and the children, scared and keeping together in groups, were hurrying home. A chapter ago I would have been like, oh, he's a terrible person, but he wouldn't hurt a child. But now we know he would hurt a child for no good reason. Kemp's proclamation, signed indeed by Adye, was posted over almost the whole district by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It gave briefly, but clearly, all the conditions of the struggle: the necessity of keeping the Invisible Man from food and sleep, the necessity for incessant watchfulness, and for a prompt attention to any evidence of his movements. I can understand trying to keep him from food and sleep, because then he would become more irrational and theoretically slip up so they can catch him, but at the same time, do you want that man to be more irrational? And so swift and decided was the action of the authorities, so prompt and universal was the belief in this strange being, that before nightfall an area of several hundred square miles was in a stringent state of siege. And before nightfall, too, a thrill of horror went through the whole watching, nervous countryside, going from whispering mouth to mouth, swift and certain, over the length and breadth of the country, past the story of the murder of Mr. Wicksteed. If our supposition that the Invisible Man's refuge was the Hintondean thickets, then we must suppose that in the early afternoon he sailed out again, bent upon some project that involved the use of a weapon. We cannot know what the project was, but the evidence that he had the iron rod in hand before he met Wicksteed is to me at least overwhelming. Of course, we can know nothing of the details of that encounter. It occurred on the edge of a gravel pit, not 200 yards from the Lord Burdock's lodge gate. Everything points to a desperate struggle. The trampled ground, the numerous wounds Mr. Wicksteed received, his splintered walking stick. But why the attack was made, save in a murderous frenzy, it is impossible to imagine. Indeed, the theory of madness is almost unavoidable. Mr. Wicksteed was a man of 45 or 46, steward to Lord Burdock, of offensive habits and appearance, the very last person in the world to provoke such a terrible antagonist. Against him, it would seem the Invisible Man used an iron rod dragged from a piece of broken fence. He stopped this quiet man, going quietly home to his midday meal, attacked him, beat down his feeble defenses, broke his arm, felled him, and smashed his head to a jelly. That's terrible. Like, absolutely terrible. And the wording. I don't want to imagine that. Of course, he must have dragged this rod out of the fencing before he met his victim. He must have been carrying it ready in his hand. Only two details beyond what has already been stated seem to bear on the matter. One is the circumstance that the gravel pit was not in Mr. Wicksteed's direct path home, but nearly a couple of 100 yards out of his way. The other is the assertion of a little girl to the effect that, going to her afternoon school, she saw the murdered man trotting, in peculiar manner, across the field towards the gravel pit. Her pantomime of his actions suggests a man pursuing something on the ground before him and striking at it ever and again with his walking stick. She was the last person to see him alive. He passed out of her sight to his death, the struggle being hidden from her only by a clump of beech trees and a slight depression in the ground. Thank goodness, a person that young does not need to witness a murder, especially one that brutal from the sounds of it. And this is coming from somebody who, grew up as an inner city kid. Now this, to the present writer's mind at least, lifts the murder out of the realm of the absolutely wanton. We may imagine that Griffin had taken the rod as a weapon indeed, but without any deliberate intention of using it in murder. Well, for this murder, maybe. Wicksteed may have then come by and noticed this rod inexplicably moving through the air. Without any thought of the Invisible Man, for Port Burdock is 10 miles away, he may have pursued it. I mean, that's fair. There's two types of people. Oh, look! A moving rod! Let's go find the ghost. And the other half being, a rod moving on its own. Let's go get the preacher. It is quite conceivable but that he may not even have heard of the Invisible Man. One can imagine the Invisible Man making off quietly in order to avoid discovering his presence in the neighborhood, and Wicksteed, excited and curious, pursuing this unaccountably locomotive object, finally striking at it. No doubt the Invisible Man could have easily distanced his middle-aged pursuer under ordinary circumstances, but the position in which Wicksteed's body was found suggests that he had the ill luck to drive his quarry into a corner between a drift of stinging nettles and the gravel pit. To those who appreciate the extraordinary irascibility of the Invisible Man, the rest of the encounter will be easy to imagine. But this is pure hypothesis. The only undeniable facts for stories of children are often unreliable, are the discovery of Wicksteed's body done to death, and of the blood-stained iron rod flung among the nettles. The abandonment of the rod by Griffin suggests that in the emotional excitement of the affair, the purpose for which he took it, if he had a purpose, was abandoned. He was certainly an intensely egotistical and unfeeling man, but the sight of his victim, his first victim, bloody and pitiful at his feet, may have released some long-pent fountain of remorse, which for a time may have flooded whatever scheme of action he had contrived. I don't think he's capable of feeling remorse. I really don't. But also, I feel like this has been going on in, like, the first person for so long that it kind of feels weird to have a narrator suddenly take over. Who is this narrator? But it's definitely interesting. After the murder of Mr. Wicksteed, he would seem to have struck across the country towards the downland. There was a story of a voice heard about sunset by a couple of men in a field near Fernbottom. It was wailing and laughing, sobbing and groaning, and ever and again it shouted. It must have been queer hearing. I'd have thought that there was a banshee nearby. It drove up across the middle of a clover field and died away towards the hills. The afternoon the Invisible Man must have learnt something of the rapid use Kemp had made of his confidences. He must have found houses locked and secured. He may have loitered about railway stations and prowled about inns, and no doubt he read the proclamations and realized something of the nature of the campaign against him. And as the evening advanced, the fields became dotted here and there with groups of 3 or 4 men, and noisy with the yelping of dogs. These men-hunters had particular instructions, in the case of an encounter, as to the way they should support one another. But he avoided them all. We may understand something of his exasperation, but it could have been none the less because he himself had supplied the information that was being used so remorselessly against him. For that day at least he lost heart. For nearly 24 hours, save when he turned on Wicksteed, he was a hunted man. In the night he must have eaten and slept, for in the morning he was himself again, active, powerful, angry, and malignant, prepared for his last great struggle against the world. And that's where we'll end for the day. We're about 65% of the way, done. It says I'm on page 172 of 195. I do like proper books, but this has been just an easier way to do it. But anyways, thank you all for listening. I apologize for my random bump-a-dums when I'm trying to figure out what while my brain is processing. But anyways, now for typical podcast business. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, rate, review on whatever podcast app you're using. And while 5 stars is appreciated, other ratings and reviews tell me how I can improve, so they're also appreciated. Sharing with your friends is welcome. You can reach out to me via talkspod@gmail.com. Phonetically, that is Tango Oscar Charlie Sierra Paris Oscar Delta @gmail.com. On Facebook, it's at Tangents on Cracked Spines Book Club, or with a voice message at anchor.fm/Tangents on Cracked Spines. If you want to support, you can also do that at anchor.fm/Tangents on Cracked Spines. But I don't expect monetary support. I do this because I enjoy it. And I hope that y'all do too. Because it's a free audiobook with some rambling commentary. The Facebook page and my personal Tumblr, which is Name-Flow. Again, phonetically, that's November Mike Echo -Flow. We'll also have updates posted and polls to vote on the next story. If you're interested in merch, I made a few items for my personal Etsy shop, which I'll link in the description. Thank you all again for listening, and you have a wonderful day.